My name is Elijah Mercer. I used to work as a geologist for the Bureau of Land Management, doing soil surveys and subsurface mapping across the western United States. Most of the job was quiet, uneventful. Hours of data collection under the sun, cataloging strata, identifying fault lines. I liked it that way. No surprises. Just me, the rock, and time. But in October of 2004, I was sent to southeastern Utah, near the Arizona border, an expanse of red desert where the land folds in on itself like a crumpled sheet of parchment. I'd be alone for the better part of 5 days. I brought enough fuel, water, and gear to last a week. I reached the area just before dusk. The land there is different. It's not just the color of the soil or the warped sandstone, it feels older. You can tell when a place has been touched too often by human hands. The devil's throat had not. It lay untouched, forgotten, like the earth itself had wanted to hide it. I parked my truck on a flat rise overlooking the canyons and made camp. That first night I sat beside a small fire and stared into the emptiness. The wind moved strangely there. It wasn't constant. It came in pulses like slow breathing. And there was a smell, not strong, just something faint, sour, and metallic like blood left too long in the sun. I slept uneasily, wrapped in my sleeping bag in the bed of the truck. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound I couldn't place, something between a whistle and a low moan, like air moving through a narrow fissure. It came from the canyon below. I told myself it was the wind. It always starts that way. The next morning I descended into the canyon. My instruments showed a significant fault line running beneath the ridge. But what drew my attention wasn't the data, it was the ground itself. About 3 miles in, I found the throat. That's what it looked like, a sinkhole nearly 60 feet wide, ringed by sheer red stone. It wasn't on any topographical map I had, and my GPS was acting up, giving inconsistent readings, jumping coordinates like it couldn't lock on. I leaned over the edge. It dropped straight down into darkness. Not a hint of the bottom. I dropped a stone and counted the seconds. 6, 7, 8. Nothing. No impact. That kind of depth wasn't normal for a collapse like this. It was too smooth, too precise. I took some photos, set up my instruments, began mapping the surrounding faults. I was so focused on the data, I didn't realize it at first. There were handprints on the stone, faint, weathered, but unmistakable. All along the inner lip of the sinkhole, dozens of them, not climbing out, pressed inward, like people had been dragged toward the pit, scrabbling at the rock in desperation. I didn't go back to camp right away. I lingered too long. The sun dipped low, shadows stretched across the canyon like claws, and the wind picked up again, hot, rhythmic, unnatural. I heard the moaning again, louder now, and something else, whispering. Not words, not language, just breath and tone. A suggestion of meaning just beyond understanding. I fled. That night I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I heard movement near the truck. Soft footsteps on sand and stone, stopping just outside my vehicle. I stayed still, not daring to lift my head, my breath shallow. I heard breathing right beside the window. Not human, too wet. too close. I stayed that way for nearly an hour. When the sun finally broke the horizon, I emerged to find prints in the dust around the truck. Bare feet, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, toes curled like talons. I packed my gear. I told myself I'd finish the survey and leave by the end of the day. I should have left then. Mid-afternoon, I returned to the throat. It had changed. The rim was different, wider, as if the earth itself had shifted. My previous markers were gone, just gone, and near the edge I saw something that made me freeze. A rope. Not recent. Old, frayed, half-rotted. Tied to a stake driven into the stone. It disappeared into the throat. I hadn't noticed it yesterday. I approached cautiously, squatted to inspect the stake. There were deep gouges in the rock, scratches, like someone had tried to climb out someone who hadn't made it. And then the smell hit me. Rot. Ancient, sun-baked decomposition. Like something deep inside had turned, spoiled, and was leaking out. And then the whispering came again. But this time it was behind me. I spun. Nothing. Just red stone, heat shimmer, and silence. I turned back. The rope was gone. Gone. My skin went cold. Not from the wind, but from something else. A presence. Like I was no longer alone. I ran ... I didn't stop until I was back at the truck. I climbed in, locked the doors, and drove. Fast. No GPS. No maps. Just instinct. About 10 miles out, the road changed. Not physically. Visually. It shifted. The dust kicked up by my tires seemed to hang in the air too long. The trees, sparse as they were, looked twisted. Not just bent by weather, twisted from the root. Wrong. I drove until I hit pavement again. Didn't stop until I reached a ranger station just outside of Monticello. The ranger, a woman in her 60s with a lined face and sharp eyes, listened to my story in silence. When I finished, she nodded slowly and walked to a back room. She returned with a thick folder. Inside were old reports, missing persons, surveyors, campers, even a park ranger from 1973. All from the same area. All vanished. Some of the reports mentioned the same thing. Whispers, handprints, an unmarked pit that locals avoided. The Navajo call it something, she told me. Ika Stai, the place that devours. She told me not to go back. I didn't argue. It's been nearly 20 years I changed careers. I live in upstate New York now. Nowhere near canyons or deserts. I don't go camping. I don't hike. I don't even drive long distances alone. But I still dream of it. Of the throat. Sometimes I hear the whispers. Faint, just under the edge of consciousness. Like something calling out, not in malice, but in need. Like it's still waiting. Like it's not finished with me. And the worst part? Sometimes I wake up and my feet are dirty, and there's red dust on my sheets. My name's Clay Harper. I'm a wildlife photographer by trade, where I was before what happened last October. I haven't picked up a camera since. I haven't even left the house. Not really. These days, the closest I get to nature is the tree outside my window. I've tried to move on. Therapy. Support groups. But nothing really works, because deep down, I know the truth. Something followed me back. It started like most of my trips. A solo trek deep into a mountain range, chasing the promise of something rare and elusive species, a perfect landscape, anything worth capturing. That fall, I'd set my sights on Ridgecrest Pass, tucked deep in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana. It was remote, barely documented. I'd found it referenced in an old UC Geological Survey file from the 60s mentioned once, then never again. That should have been my first clue. I arrived at the trailhead the afternoon of October 7th. No cell service, no signs, no other vehicles. Just the winding logging road behind me and the jagged spines of the Bitterroots ahead. The air was thinner up there, clean, cold, smelled like pine and snowmelt. I loaded my gear into a hiking pack, camera, tent, bear spray, food for a week, and started the climb. I'd planned to hike for 2 days, set up camp just below the pass, and spend the rest of the week photographing the high alpine terrain. There were rumors of rare mountain goats, even lynx, but I wasn't chasing animals this time. I was chasing silence. By the second day I got it. There was no sound, not even wind, no birds, no insects, just the crunch of my boots on frostbitten ground and the occasional crack of ice shearing off a distant rock face. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow, like something was missing. The air grew colder as I ascended, and the terrain more treacherous, sharp stone ridges, ice-glazed switchbacks, vertical drops that plunged into black pine valleys. Just past dusk, I found a narrow plateau just below Ridgecrest Pass. Sheltered by a cliff wall and surrounded by massive stone outcroppings that looked almost placed, I set up camp. That night I lit a small fire, ate freeze-dried stew, and stared up at the sky. No stars, just thick cloud cover pressing low over the mountain. It felt like being buried. Around midnight I woke to a sound I couldn't explain. It was distant, low, and guttural. Not an animal, not a landslide. It sounded wet, like a boulder being dragged across mud, slow and deliberate. I lay there in my sleeping bag, listening. It came again, closer. Then the silence returned. At first light, I checked the perimeter. No prints, no signs of movement. Just frost and scattered pine needles. I told myself it was the wind, a trick of acoustics in the mountains. But that morning I found something else. About 50 yards upslope, embedded in the rock, was a mark. At first I thought it was a natural groove, some fault line or glacial scar. But it was too uniform, too deliberate. A perfect circle, maybe 2 feet wide, etched deep into the stone. Around it were jagged lines like sun rays or maybe claws. I took a photo, cataloged the coordinates, and moved on. That was my job, after all. But as the day went on, I kept finding more of them. Circles, symbols, some shallow, some deep, all spaced irregularly, as if scattered by a hand too large to comprehend. I stopped taking pictures. That night I didn't sleep. The sound came again closer than before, accompanied by something else, a kind of rhythmic clicking, like bones snapping or teeth chattering. I sat up in the tent, bear spray in one hand, flashlight in the other. I scanned the slope beyond the clearing. My beam caught nothing. Then I noticed the smell. Rot. earthy, wet rot like a compost heap soaked in blood. The sound stopped, and something tapped the side of my tent. Once, twice, 3 times I froze. Another tap, and a low scraping sound circling the fabric wall around me. I killed the flashlight, sat there in the dark, barely breathing. Eventually the sounds faded. The smell lingered. When I stepped out at dawn, there were no tracks, just a faint impression of a circle in the frost, maybe 4 feet wide, where nothing had frozen. I decided to leave. I packed fast, heart hammering in my chest. As I slung my pack over my shoulder, I glanced up at Ridgecrest Pass, maybe 200 feet above me, and I saw something standing there. Tall, slender, pale. Not a bear. Not human. It had no face, just skin pulled taut over a narrow skull, stretched like parchment. It didn't move, didn't even flinch, just watched. I turned and fled down the trail. I hiked until dusk, only stopping to drink and check my bearings. But something was wrong with the landscape. The trail had changed. The rock formations were unfamiliar. Trees that should have been on my left were now on my right. The air was warmer, even though I was descending. And worse, the silence had followed me. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a kind of pressure, like a thick fog pressing in on my ears. I felt disoriented, lightheaded. That night I didn't camp. I kept walking with my headlamp on, moving downhill until the batteries gave out. I finally rested beneath an overhang, wrapped in my bag. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember the dream. I was back at the stone circle, the one I found etched in the mountain, but now it was open like a hatch, and something was rising out of it. Too many limbs, joints that bent wrong, skin like dry wax stretched over bone. It had my voice. It whispered things I didn't understand. Then it turned toward me and opened its mouth, and I woke up, but I wasn't under the overhang. I was back at the campsite, right below Ridgecrest Pass. My pack was there. My tent still half collapsed. Everything exactly as I'd left it, except there were more circles now, dozens of them, etched around my gear in a perfect spiral. I didn't walk out, I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, then crawled, then staggered again. I followed the sun, followed the slope of the land. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just moved. It took me 2 days to reach the service road. Another 4 hours until I flagged down a logging truck and begged the driver to take me to the nearest town. I told no one. Not at first, how could I? I checked satellite maps. Ridgecrest Pass didn't exist anymore. Just a blank spot on the survey data. I tried returning the next spring, but the road was washed out, gone, like it had never been there, but the dreams haven't stopped. And sometimes when I wake up I find frost in my room, a perfect circle etched into the window pane, like it's marking me, like it's waiting, and I know one day I'll go back, or something beneath that mountain will come looking for me. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in omens, but if I had been, I'd have turned back the moment my hiking boots lost grip on the loose scree, and I nearly tumbled backward off the mountain. I should have taken the slipping rocks and the silence in the trees as warnings. I should have listened, but I didn't. My name is Eric Marlowe, 34, solo backpacker, and until recently a firm believer in rational explanations. No cryptids, no spirits, no ancient curses. Just people, wildlife, and nature's occasional cruelty. At least that's what I thought before I tried to climb Mount Antero alone in early September. I'd taken a week off work after a brutal stretch at the Emergency Dispatch Center in Colorado Springs. Burnout was creeping in. My boss called it compassion fatigue, and he wasn't wrong. I needed solitude, distance from the panicked voices on the other end of the line. So I packed my gear, filled my pack, and headed for the mountains. Antero isn't the most dramatic peak in the Solwatch Range, but it has this rugged beauty, a jagged spine of stone that cuts through the sky, with veins of aquamarine and feldspar gleaming in the sun. I'd read that people had found gems up there. I wasn't interested in treasure, just silence. And at first, that's what I got. The trail was steep and mostly deserted. Early fall meant that tourists were thinning out, and the weather hadn't turned brutal yet. The air was crisp, thin, and clean. I set up camp just below treeline, a flat spot nestled between two twisted bristlecone pines. It was quiet in that eerie mountain way where the wind sounds more like breathing, and every snap of a twig turns your head. That first night I heard what I assumed were marmots scurrying around my tent. Once or twice something brushed against the nylon. Probably a pine branch, I told myself. When I stepped out to relieve myself around midnight, I could have sworn I saw movement higher up the slope, something tall and thin passing between boulders. But my flashlight revealed nothing but rocks and shadows. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. By morning, the unease had faded. I chalked it up to altitude and being alone. I'd planned to summit that day and return to camp by evening. My pack was light, just water, snacks, and essentials. The trail became less defined as I climbed, shifting to loose rock and scree. That's when I slipped. One moment I was upright, the next I was sliding down the slope, boots scraping and arms flailing. I caught myself on a jagged boulder, heart racing. When I looked up, I saw something. Something. Not a person, not an animal, just a figure, high on the ridge, hunched but tall. It wasn't wearing anything. Its skin, or whatever covered it, looked grayish and weathered, like old bark. I stared at it, waiting for movement, a sign I wasn't hallucinating. But it didn't move. Then the wind shifted, and I heard something, not a voice. Not exactly. More like a dry, brittle sound carried on the breeze. It was barely louder than a whisper, but it filled my head like it was being spoken directly inside it. Come down. I turned, nearly fell again, and scrambled the rest of the way back to the trail. I didn't look back. I just kept descending until I reached the tree line again. But something had changed. The forest felt tighter, the trees more gnarled, leaning inward. The birds had gone silent. I told myself I was just shaken. Took a long drink from my water bottle. Maybe I was dehydrated or experiencing some kind of altitude-induced paranoia. By late afternoon, I was back at my campsite, trying to calm my nerves, but the silence never lifted. That night, the whispering returned. Only now it wasn't carried on the wind. It was around my tent, right outside. soft, brittle voices. Not speaking a language I recognized more, like dry leaves brushing together, layered over each other like dozens of mouths whispering at once. I held my breath, clutching the knife I kept in my sleeping bag. The whispers grew louder, closer, then everything stopped. Something pressed against the side of the tent, slowly, deliberately, like a hand or something like it. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I don't know how. I just lay there, heart thundering, knife shaking in my grip, staring at the fabric between me and whatever was outside. After what felt like hours, the pressure lifted. I stayed awake until dawn. At first light, I broke camp and began hiking out. I didn't care that it was early, that I was tired. I needed to get off that mountain, but the trail was wrong. Somehow it had changed. The markers were missing. Trees looked unfamiliar. Distances seemed off. I walked for hours, and every turn brought me back to the same place, that damn clearing between the bristlecone pines. By the third time, I realized I wasn't just lost. I was being kept here. That night, I didn't set up camp. I just sat on a rock, knife in hand, flashlight dead, listening. And they came. I couldn't see them, not clearly. Just glimpses, pale limbs in the shadows, hunched forms gliding just out of reach. I couldn't tell how many there were. Maybe they weren't separate. Maybe it was one thing, or maybe it didn't matter. The whispering began again, louder this time, insistent. Stay. It felt like it was inside my skull, under my skin, in my lungs. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up at home, in my bed. No explanation. No missing time. My gear was in my garage, covered in pine needles and dirt. My boots still caked with scree. My GPS, when I finally plugged it in, showed only one track, a clean path to Mount Antero, and back. But I don't remember coming down. I've tried to forget. I've tried to explain it away: stress, hallucination, altitude sickness. But then the dream started. I wake up to the sound of whispering, sometimes faint, sometimes right in my ear. My hands still ache from gripping the knife. I hear the wind rattling the windows, and for a split second it sounds like a dry voice saying, "Come back." And I know it's still waiting. It was October 2004 when I took a solo trip out to Red Hollow, a stretch of dense forest in northern Pennsylvania that locals didn't talk much about. I wasn't looking for anything supernatural, hell. I wasn't even looking for adventure. I just needed to get away from the mess that had become my life. My name's Evan, and back then I was 33, recently divorced, laid off, and pretty much living out of my Subaru Outback. I'd spent the last few months drifting from town to town with a notebook full of unfinished ideas and a head full of regret. Red Hollow wasn't on any official hiking map. I only found it thanks to a half-legible note scribbled in the margin of an old trail guide I bought at a used bookstore in Scranton. The note said, simply, "Red Hollow, don't go past the stone gate. They don't like it." I should have taken that as a warning, but instead I took it as intrigue. I pulled into a gravel turnout just before dusk, the forest already soaked in autumn shadows. The trees were tall and close, and there was a kind of heaviness to the air, as if the land had taken a deep breath and was holding it. I grabbed my pack and headed in, sticking close to the old trail that cut through a corridor of sugar maples and red oaks, the path carpeted and leaves the color of rust. I hiked about 3 miles in before setting up camp near a half-dry creek bed. The silence out there was different, thicker than normal. Not peaceful, just still. Even the birds kept quiet. That night I lay in my tent, listening to the wind, or what I thought was the wind, move through the trees. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it didn't sound right. It wasn't constant, like wind should be. It came in pulses, like something breathing. And somewhere behind that sound, there was something else. A faint clicking. At first, I thought it was just branches knocking together, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I followed the trail deeper, hoping to clear my head and get some distance from whatever weirdness I'd imagined. Around noon, I found it, the stone gate. It wasn't a gate in the traditional sense, just 2 moss-covered stone pillars rising out of the forest floor, maybe 6 feet tall, spaced about 10 feet apart. No fence, no wall. Just those 2 stones, standing alone like sentries from a forgotten time. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped between them. The forest changed after that. The color seemed muted, the trees darker, more tangled. The wind didn't move the leaves the same way. It felt intentional, like the forest had become aware of me. I kept moving, ignoring the rising chill in my spine, telling myself I'd just walk a little farther and then turn around. That's when I found the house, a crumbling, weathered structure half swallowed by the woods, its roof caved in on one side and the porch warped and sinking into the earth. There was no path leading to it, no signs that anyone had lived there in decades. I approached slowly, calling out just in case. No answer. Inside the house was hollow. Dust thick in the air, old furniture barely recognizable beneath mildew and rot. But what struck me most were the photographs, dozens of them, hanging crooked on the walls. All black and white, all portraits. And in every single one, the person's face had been scratched out. Not torn or faded scratched. Deep gouges where eyes should be. I should have left right then. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of that strange cabin, the journal still open beside me, lit by the dying beam of my flashlight. The words I'd read looped through my head over and over, each line more disturbing than the last. I had no memory of writing them, and yet the handwriting was mine. Every stroke, every hesitation of ink, it was me. Don't listen when it talks like her. That's not her anymore. The trees keep moving when you're not looking. If you see your own face in the clearing, run. It's already too late. I stayed there, motionless, for what felt like hours. Eventually, I turned the flashlight off to preserve the battery. And that was a mistake, because when the light died, the house started breathing again. Slow, almost gentle inhalations. A wooden floorboard creaked every few seconds, in a rhythm too steady to be random. The walls seemed to expand and contract just slightly, like the place itself had lungs. And then came the whispers, faint, from upstairs. I wasn't ready for upstairs, but I couldn't stay in that room either. So I stood, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, even though it no longer worked. and crept toward the front door. The hinges moaned as I pushed it open, and I stepped back into the freezing night. The air outside was different now, wrong. The trees weren't where I remembered them. The path I had followed in was gone. In its place was dense brush, twisted roots, and a blackness that swallowed the moonlight whole. Turned in a slow circle, the forest had rearranged itself. I was trapped. Somewhere behind me, the floorboards inside the house creaked again. Not in rhythm this time. Footsteps. I bolted. I didn't care where I was going. I just ran. My boots thudded over frost-hardened dirt, snagging on roots, slipping over wet leaves. My breath came in panicked gasps. Branches whipped at my face. I didn't look back, couldn't. Eventually, I broke through the trees into another clearing. At first, I thought I'd found the same field I'd camped in before. But then I saw the fire. It was small, flickering low. A single flame in the center of the clearing. No logs, no pit, just flame, hovering inches above the grass. And beside it, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, was a woman. "Evan," she said, not looking up. Her voice was calm, familiar. I froze. No one should have known my name. Not here. The woman looked up slowly. Her face was cast in shadow, but I could see enough to know I had never seen her before. And yet, something in me twisted like I should know her, like she was buried somewhere in a memory I hadn't made yet. "Sit," she said, "before it finds you." I didn't move. "You left once," she said, "but you came back." My throat was dry. "What are you talking about?" Her lips curved into a small, sad smile. "They always come back. That's how it keeps itself fed." I took a slow step back. The woman didn't react. She stared into the hovering flame like it held the answers to every question I hadn't asked yet. "You remember more than you think," she said. "It's already started. The gaps, the time slips, the echoing thoughts. That thing in the house? That wasn't the first time you saw it." I shook my head. "You're insane." She looked up at me again, this time with pity in her eyes. "You keep saying that, every time." The fire between us flared suddenly bright white and possibly hot. I stumbled back, shielding my face, but there was no heat, only light. And in that light I saw things, figures, faces, dozens of them floating in the air above the flame. Men and women, all pale, all wide-eyed, all looking right at me. I recognized some of them. I didn't know from where. One face pressed closer to the firelight than the others. A man in his 40s, gray stubble, deep, sunken eyes. Me, older, burned and bloodied, and staring at me with rage. "You shouldn't have come back," the older me said. The flame vanished. So did the woman. I was alone. The clearing was dark and silent again. I dropped to my knees, shaking, the taste of copper in my mouth. I didn't remember falling, but my palms were scraped, and there was blood on my tongue like I'd bitten it. I wanted to scream, but I didn't want whatever was out there to hear me. I got up, slowly, quietly. I turned around and nearly collapsed again, because behind me, about 10 feet away, was a figure, standing perfectly still, almost blending into the trees. The same old man I'd seen in the woods earlier, only now he was smiling. His mouth too wide, his eyes too many. There were more of them, figures behind every tree. watching, and somewhere deep in the woods the forest exhaled. The eyes didn't blink. There were too many of them. Somewhere in the dark between the trees, a dozen or maybe more figures just stood there, silent, unmoving. They didn't breathe. They didn't shift. They just watched. The old man was front and center, that same crooked smile stretched impossibly wide, like it had been carved into his face. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off him. My breath came in short gasps. I didn't know how long I stood there staring at him through the black. 5 minutes? 20? Time didn't seem to matter anymore. Then, without a sound, the figures were gone, just vanished. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, no dispersing shadows. I was alone again, and somehow that was worse. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin. I must have blacked out, because one moment I was in the clearing, and the next I was standing in that god-awful living room again, the door wide open behind me. My legs ached. My skin was covered in scratches. But I didn't remember walking back. Something had changed. I could feel it in the air, thick and metallic, like blood on the tongue. There was a noise upstairs now, a slow dragging, not footsteps. Something being pulled. I didn't want to go up, but I did. The stairs groaned under me, the kind of groan that makes your stomach drop. With each step, the dragging sound stopped, then resumed, a little louder. At the top of the stairs there was a hallway, 3 doors. One open, 2 shut. I walked toward the open one. Inside was a small bedroom, dusty. Rotten curtains fluttering gently, even though there was no breeze. An old bed frame, a mirror on the wall, and sitting on the edge of the bed was me, or someone who looked like me, pale, hollow-eyed, clutching something in both hands. A photograph. I stepped into the room. My reflection didn't move. "What the hell is this?" I asked. My voice felt weak in the air, like it didn't belong there. The man looked up. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just held out the photograph. I took it. It was black and white, worn at the edges. A group of 4 hikers standing in front of this same cabin, younger, smiling. One of them was me. The others were faces I didn't recognize, except I did recognize them. Somewhere deep down I knew who they were. And suddenly it hit me, the journal, the entries I hadn't written, the ones that said, "Don't listen when it talks like her." That's not her anymore. I'd been here before. This wasn't my first trip into the woods. Not even close. This was a return. My stomach twisted. I staggered back out of the room, down the stairs, clutching the photograph like a lifeline. The light outside the windows had changed. It was still night, but the moonlight had turned red, bathing the room in a soft, hellish glow. That's when I heard the voices again. Not whispers this time. Not murmurs, names, my name, over and over again, spoken in different voices. That's when I heard the voices again. Not whispers this time. Not murmurs, names, my name, over and over again, spoken in different voices. I opened the front door. The forest was closer than it had been before. Trees that had been 50 feet away now loomed right up against the porch. The path was gone again. Only dense, choking forest, and that sound, that pulse, like a heartbeat made of roots and stone and teeth, surrounded me. That's when I saw the bodies hung from trees, not decomposing, preserved almost, like the forest was keeping them fresh. They were the hikers from the photo. One of them, God help me, was me. It wasn't possible, but there it was, my own face, staring down at me from a noose, eyes open, mouth twisted in a silent scream, skin gray-blue. And that's when the forest spoke, not in words, in memory. It poured into my mind like water through broken glass, ripping through everything I thought was true. I remembered, not all at once, not clearly, but I remembered enough. I'd come here before, in 2011, a group of 4, me, Claire, Thomas, and Daniel, friends. We wanted an adventure, something remote, something that no one else had done. We found the cabin. We stayed too long. Something happened. Something woke up. One by one, the others disappeared. I tried to run. I made it out. But the forest, it never let go. It called me back over and over again. Every time I left, it erased more. Erased just enough for me to be curious again, to wonder, to come back. And every time it kept a piece of me, until now I dropped to my knees, screaming, crying, laughing. It was never going to let me go. The version of me in the cabin, the one who handed me the photo, was just the most recent one. There had been others, dozens, maybe. How many times had I wandered these woods, thinking it was the first time? The red moon burned overhead. The trees closed in. The voices rose to a fever pitch. And then, just as suddenly, silence. The forest went still. The cabin vanished behind me, and I was standing at the edge of the highway. Sunlight, cars, birds. I was back. I stumbled into town an hour later. Covered in dirt, wild-eyed, the locals didn't ask questions. Maybe they knew. Maybe they'd seen it before. I didn't tell anyone what happened. What would I say? That the forest eats time? That I've died already, and this is just another loop? I kept the photograph. It's in a drawer in my apartment. Sometimes late at night, I take it out and look at the faces. They haven't aged. But mine has. I don't hike anymore. And when I dream, I see the forest watching me, still waiting, still hungry, still whispering my name. They say the trail is closed now. The official reason? Erosion, washed out bridges, wildlife hazards. Something vague enough to be forgotten. There are warning signs at the old trailhead. Bright yellow boards with cracked black lettering, trail closed. Dangerous terrain, nitrogen monoxide access beyond this point. Violators will be fined or prosecuted. But no one patrols it, because no one dares to. The locals in the nearby town of Dunlow Ridge know better. The older ones, anyway. They don't talk about Red Hollow anymore. Not out loud. They just glance toward the tree line with lowered voices and wary eyes. Sometimes they whisper the old names. The Murmuring Wood, the Root Well, the Hunger Forest. But most people have forgotten. The town has changed since Evan. New families, new faces, new kids who don't know what that land used to be, until someone wanders in again. His name is Cody Lang, 26, amateur filmmaker. He's been documenting abandoned places for his YouTube channel, Urban Echo. His most popular video hit 400,000 views, an old sanatorium in New Hampshire. He's always on the hunt for the next big discovery. The kind of story no one else has captured. The kind of place people warn you not to go. So when he hears about an unmarked trail in West Virginia that doesn't appear on Google Maps, he's intrigued. When he learns about the legends, the missing hikers, the disappearances, he's hooked. The locals refuse to say much, but he gets enough to find the spot. And one gray morning in October, Cody parks his rental Jeep just off the gravel road at the edge of the forest. No cell signal, just the hum of wind through trees and the distant croak of a raven overhead. He clips a GoPro to his backpack strap, checks the battery on his camcorder, and starts walking. The camera rolls. He jokes to himself in the first take. Well, this is it, Red Hollow. Supposedly the creepiest place in Appalachia. Locals say it swallows people. I say, let's find out. He smiles at the lens. That's the last smile the footage ever captures. 3 weeks later, a hiker finds his camera wedged in the roots of a black pine. It's still recording. Or maybe it just started again. The last 30 seconds are nothing but static until the static shifts. Just faintly in the gray haze, there's a shape. A figure in the trees. Not Cody. Older. Worn. Dressed in faded clothes from another era. It's Evan. But his face is wrong. Too still. Too knowing. He raises a hand toward the camera, and his lips move. No sound, just one word, again. Then the feed cuts. No one ever finds Cody, just his backpack. And a journal. Inside the last written page simply says, "Don't listen when it talks like her. If you see your own face in the clearing, run. The forest remembers you, even if you forget it." And in the margins, scrawled in shaky, rushed pen, "The Red Hollow doesn't sleep. It waits. And it never forgets a name once it learns it." An isolated hike, a forgotten marker, and something ancient that watches from the water. My name is Garrett Moore. I'm a wildlife photographer, or at least that's the excuse I give people when I disappear into the woods for days at a time. Truth is, I just like being alone. I've always felt more at home with the sound of wind in the trees than with people making small talk in fluorescent-lit offices. That's why I found myself deep in the Washita Mountains in early October of last year, hiking into an old stretch of forest that hadn't seen foot traffic in decades. I'd read about it in an obscure forum where someone posted a blurry photo of a strange stone marker half submerged in a creek bed. No coordinates, no follow-up, just a caption. "Don't touch it. It watches." That was all it took. I packed my gear and set out 2 days later. The first day was uneventful. Golden light filtered through the oaks, and I made decent progress bushwhacking through dense undergrowth to reach the remote area where the photo had supposedly been taken. That night I camped near a small bluff. The air was crisp. The stars were sharp. But sometime around 2 a.m. I woke up. I couldn't explain why. I just remember lying there in the tent, heart racing, certain something was moving just beyond the range of my firelight. Nothing showed itself, no sounds, just silence, heavy and complete. The next morning I found the creek. It was narrow, maybe 10 feet across, and ran shallow over smooth stone. I followed it upstream until I found the marker. Just like in the photo, it was a boulder, maybe the size of a large cooler, rising out of the water at a tilt, weathered, black. and covered in markings, not carvings, not letters, but deep organic grooves, like something had dragged claws across its surface over and over for centuries. As I stepped closer, the air around me changed, grew still. The birds went silent. The wind died. I reached for my camera, raised the lens, and froze. There were footprints around the base of the stone. Bare feet, human, but they weren't mine. I hadn't walked into the creek yet. They led to the stone and then stopped. I backed away slowly. I wanted to believe they were old, maybe left by another hiker years ago, but the mud was soft. Too soft to hold a print for long. These were fresh. I didn't take the photo. I turned around and hiked back to camp. The wind picked up again once I left the creek bed. Birds chirped. It was like someone hit play on a paused forest soundtrack. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a weird atmospheric pressure thing, or my nerves, but it didn't help. That night I didn't sleep. I just lay in the tent, listening. Somewhere out there I heard water trickling, and something moving through it, slowly, deliberately. I told myself it was just a raccoon, maybe a deer. Then I heard breathing, not an animal's, a slow, wet exhale. I stayed completely still, hand on the handle of my knife. I didn't light the lantern. I didn't unzip the tent. I just waited, muscles tense, for hours. Eventually, the sounds stopped. By morning, I convinced myself it had all been a dream. I broke camp fast and made for the creek again. Something inside me needed closure. I needed to see the marker in daylight again, to photograph it and prove to myself it was just a rock. But when I reached the creek, the stone was gone. Not shifted, not submerged, gone. The water trickled quietly through an empty bed. The footprints were gone too. But something had been left behind. Gouges in the rocks along the bank. Deep claw marks. Fresh. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. A sound. Water sloshing just a few feet upstream. I looked. There was a face, half submerged, pale, eyes open, staring at me. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. I ran. I didn't stop for hours. I didn't eat, didn't drink. I pushed my legs until I collapsed against my car and peeled out of the trailhead parking lot, barely looking in the rearview mirror. I tried telling someone, a forest ranger, actually. Gave him a cleaned-up version, said I'd seen something strange, maybe a person out there who needed help. He smiled tightly and nodded. "You went near Old Devil's Creek, didn't you?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. He just sighed and said, "That place has been trouble since before we started keeping records. Don't go back." I haven't. I won't. But a week ago, someone posted a new photo to that same forum. A different boulder, different creek, same markings, same caption. "Don't touch it. It watches." And this time the photo had a shadow standing behind the stone. Something tall, something wrong. I've spent a lot of time alone in the woods, sometimes in a tent, sometimes in a rented cabin when the weather's rough. I know how to handle bad storms, curious wildlife, even the occasional drunk camper stumbling through the wrong site. But what happened to me that weekend in the Blue Ridge Mountains? That was something else. Something I still don't have a name for. It was the fall of 2019. I'd been working myself into the ground 34 years old, stuck in the grind, barely sleeping. So when I saw a listing for a remote cabin on an outfitter's website, I jumped at it. Off-grid, no power, no water, just a cot, a wood stove, and peace. Exactly what I needed. The cabin sat on a ridge a few hours from the nearest town, the kind of place where the roads are just suggestions on a map. I parked my Jeep at the end of a dirt trail and hiked in with my pack, boots crunching through the brittle leaves. The air was sharp and clean. No cell service, no noise, just trees and the faint rush of wind through the canopy. It was late afternoon by the time I reached the place. Small, sturdy, probably built decades ago. The wood was weathered and the porch leaned a little, but the door was solid and the lock worked. There was a water pump out back and a small outhouse a ways into the trees. I unpacked, lit the stove, and settled in for what I hoped would be a weekend of nothing. No screens, no calls, just sleep, books, and hiking. The first night was peaceful. I cooked on my little propane burner, read by lantern light, and dozed off to the sound of wind rustling the trees. It was the first real sleep I'd had in months. The next morning I took a trail that looped behind the cabin and climbed higher up the ridge. I hiked for a few hours, followed deer tracks, even spotted a hawk circling overhead. When I got back, I found something strange. The door to the cabin was ajar. I was sure I'd locked it. I always do just have it, but now it was cracked open about an inch. I stopped cold, heart thudding. I scanned the area. No boot prints, no broken window. Just that open door. I stepped inside, cautiously. Everything looked the same. My gear was untouched, stove cold. Nothing out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I double-checked every window and locked the door behind me again. Maybe I'd just been tired and forgot. That's what I told myself anyway. That night, the woods were louder, more unsettled. I sat on the porch for a bit after dinner, wrapped in a jacket, sipping whiskey from a tin cup. I sat on the tin cup. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not animals too heavy, not constant either. Just a few slow steps in the brush, then nothing. I held my breath and listened. The sound came again off to the left this time, closer. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Then silence. I stood up, heart hammering. The lantern on the porch barely lit more than a few feet beyond the railing. I didn't want to shine my flashlight. I didn't want to see. Eventually, I went inside and locked the door. I kept the lantern on all night. Didn't sleep much. The next morning, I found something in the dirt near the water pump. A handprint. Human, fresh, no boots, no tracks. Just a single, clear handprint in the soft soil. Fingers long. Too long. I stood there staring at it, waiting to hear laughter, like maybe someone was messing with me, some local prank or backwoods initiation, but no one came. As the sun dipped below the trees, I prepped a fire. I figured light and heat would keep whatever was out there at bay. But by midnight, I realized I'd been wrong. I was dozing in the cot when something scraped against the back wall of the cabin. Not loud, just enough to wake me. A slow, dragging sound. I sat up, held my breath. Another scrape, closer to the window now. I grabbed the hatchet I kept beside the cot and stood, tiptoeing toward the front of the cabin. My flashlight was in my pack, but I didn't dare turn it on. Something in me said not to give away my position. Then the doorknob started to turn. Silently, slowly, click. The door creaked, just slightly. I lunged and braced it shut with my shoulder, heart pounding so loud I thought it would echo through the woods. I waited there for what felt like hours, no footsteps, no voice, nothing, just the cold wood beneath my palm and the thrum of blood in my ears. Eventually I cracked the door and peeked out. Empty porch, no movement, no signs of anyone. But on the outside of the door, a smear of mud. Another handprint, this time higher. At head level, the fingers were too long. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, I packed everything. Threw it all in my bag, locked the cabin out of habit, though I didn't know why, and bolted down the trail. The woods were dead silent. When I reached the Jeep, it was untouched. Engine started without a problem, but as I turned around to reverse out of the clearing, I saw it, up the slope, halfway behind a tree. A figure, tall, thin, motionless. It didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. I didn't wait. I floored it down that trail, gravel and pine needles spitting out behind me. I didn't stop until I hit the first paved road. I haven't gone back. I've rented cabins since. Sure, I still camp, but never alone, never off-grid, and never near the Blue Ridge. Some people go into the woods to escape the world, but sometimes the world isn't what you need to escape. It was early October when I decided to take a solo weekend trip into the Washita Mountains of Arkansas. The idea was simple, a few days alone, just me, the trees, and the sky. I'd been dealing with burnout, the kind of exhaustion that creeps into your bones and makes the world feel like it's pressing in on you. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to talk. I just needed to disappear for a bit. I found the listing online, an old, decommissioned fire lookout tower, available for weekend rentals. It was remote, perched on a ridge several miles from the nearest trailhead. The photos were exactly what I was looking for. A simple steel tower with a cabin on top, 360-degree views, a tiny wood stove, and a bedroll on the floor. No electricity, no plumbing, no cell service. Perfect. I arrived just after noon on Friday. The hike in was rugged but beautiful, and by the time I reached the base of the tower, I was already feeling better. The structure creaked and groaned in the wind, but it looked solid enough. A narrow steel staircase spiraled around the support legs, leading up to the cabin like a ladder to the sky. I climbed up, unlocked the hatch, and stepped inside. It was just like the photos. Spartan, weathered, but somehow comforting. The windows gave a panoramic view of endless forest in every direction. You could see for miles hills and valleys fading into blue haze. I unpacked, cracked open a camp meal, and watched the sun dip behind the trees. That first night was peaceful. The wind howled around the tower, and the metal supports groaned like they were speaking in some forgotten language, but I didn't mind. I bundled up in my sleeping bag, the stove glowing softly, and drifted off. But around 2 a.m., I woke up. Something was scratching. It wasn't the wind. It was distinct, rhythmic, deliberate, like nails on wood. I sat up in the dark, heart thudding, listening. The scratching stopped. Then a soft thud beneath the floor. I turned on my headlamp and pressed my ear to the planks. Silence? Maybe it was an animal, I told myself. A raccoon or a squirrel climbing the tower legs. I didn't want to go outside and check. Not in the middle of the night. Not 40 feet off the ground in a creaky tower. I lay awake for a long time, waiting, but the sounds didn't come back. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning was clear and cold. I made coffee on my backpacking stove and watched a blanket of mist roll through the trees. The night felt far away, dreamlike. I convinced myself it had been nothing. Around mid-afternoon, I decided to explore the area. I hiked down the slope behind the tower, following what looked like an old game trail. After a mile or so, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a circle, about 15 feet across, perfectly shaped, with dozens of smooth stones placed evenly around the edge. In the center was a wooden totem, a crude figure about 3 feet tall, carved from a single piece of pine. It had no face, just a hollow where one should have been. There were small bones scattered around it, bird bones, maybe charred black. I didn't touch anything. I didn't take pictures. I just turned around and headed back to the tower, a tightness settling in my chest I couldn't shake. That night, the wind picked up hard. The whole structure moaned with each gust, and the trees below bent and swayed like they were alive. I sat by the stove, trying to read by lantern light, but I couldn't focus. Just after midnight, the scratching came again. This time it was louder, faster, like someone was dragging their fingers in circles across the metal stairs outside. Then came the footsteps. Slow. One, then another. Clang, clang, getting closer. I killed the light and crouched by the hatch, knife in hand, heart slamming in my chest. The footsteps. Then tap, tap, tap. On the glass, I turned my head slowly. There, silhouetted in the moonlight, was a figure. It was pressed against the window, unmoving. I couldn't make out a face, just a shape, tall and thin, hands flat on the glass. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then it stepped back, one slow, fluid motion, and disappeared. I stayed like that until dawn. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, sunlight was pouring through the windows. The woods looked normal. Every window on the cabin above had been marked. Thin, winding symbols traced in ash or soot. Circles, spirals, things that made my stomach turn to look at. On the ground I found something else. A small wooden figure, carved crudely. Faceless, just like the one in the circle I'd found. It had been left at the base of the stairs, facing upward, watching. I didn't stop walking. I hiked out fast, my head on a swivel the entire time. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but I felt it. Something had followed me. When I got to my car, I didn't even take off my pack. I just threw it in the trunk and drove, white-knuckled, all the way back to town. That was the last time I ever stayed in a fire tower. I never told anyone I didn't report it. What would I say? That some faceless thing stalked me through the forest? But sometimes, even now, I'll hear a noise outside my window at night. A tap, a scratch, and I remember the symbols, the totem, the eyes I couldn't see but knew were there. I don't know what it was. I don't want to. All I know is if you ever see a fire tower listed as abandoned but safe, keep driving. It was October of 2016, and I was long overdue for a break. I'd been working 6-day weeks at a warehouse job that was slowly grinding me down. So I decided to take a long weekend to myself, completely off the grid. No phone, no emails, just some peace and quiet. I booked a cabin in the mountains of West Virginia. Not the touristy kind, but one tucked deep in the woods, past a gravel road most people wouldn't even notice. The listing was bare bones. 1-room log cabin, wood stove for heat, a small fire ring outside. No electricity, no running water, just solitude. That's what I wanted. That's what I thought I needed. I arrived around 3 p.m. after a 4-hour drive and a 10-minute hike from the small dirt lot where I left my truck. The place looked exactly like the photos: weathered wood, a rusted tin roof, and a creaky old porch that looked like it had stories of its own. The air was crisp, the trees half bare, and the forest alive with the dry rustling of wind and leaves. That first night was uneventful. I cooked a simple dinner over the fire, had a beer, and settled into the cot with a book and a lantern. The forest was quiet in a way that made every little sound stand out: twigs snapping in the dark, the distant hoot of an owl, branches swaying against each other like whispers. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of crunching leaves, slow, deliberate footsteps. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe a black bear, but something felt off. The steps weren't wandering, they were circling the cabin. I didn't move. I just listened. One slow lap around the building, then nothing. Silence. I must have stayed awake another hour before I drifted off again. The next morning I checked around the perimeter. No tracks that I could see, but the ground was thick with leaves and damp soil. Hard to tell anything for sure. I chalked it up to nerves. Isolation can do that to your mind. I spent that day hiking further up the ridge. The trees were beautiful, the air clean. By evening I was back at the cabin, sore but relaxed. I made another fire, cooked dinner, and tried to enjoy the peace again. But that night, things escalated. It started with the footsteps again, around midnight. This time they didn't just circle the cabin once. They stopped right outside the front door. I held my breath, listening. Then something knocked. 3 slow, hollow thuds. Not loud but firm, like someone knocking with the side of their fist. I didn't move. I didn't answer. Eventually, the footsteps moved away. At dawn, I found something by the front door. A small bundle of sticks tied together with twine. At first, I thought it might be some sort of joke. But I didn't tell anyone I was out there. Nobody knew where I was except the booking site and a friend back home. I burned the bundle in the fire pit. I don't know why. I just didn't want it near me. That afternoon, I thought I saw someone watching me from the tree line. A tall figure, half obscured behind the trees. When I looked straight at it, it was gone. I packed my gear and left that evening, hiking back to my truck before nightfall. When I got to the lot, I found my driver's side mirror hanging by a wire, long, thin scratches down the door, like someone had run a knife or fingernails along the paint. I drove until I hit the main road, not stopping until I reached a motel an hour away. I don't know who or what was out there. I haven't been back to the cabin since. I still love the woods. But now I trust my instincts more than ever. And when the forest goes silent, I listen. It was late October when I decided to take one last solo camping trip before winter set in. There's this stretch of national forest in western North Carolina I'd been eyeing for a while, dense, under-traveled, mostly quiet aside from the occasional hunter or fisherman. I'd mapped out a loop trail with a few primitive camping spots. But there was one I really wanted to hit, a small open patch beside an old reservoir. The water line had receded over the years, leaving behind a rocky shore and twisted trees jutting up from the shallows like skeletal arms. It looked eerie in the photos, sure, but also peaceful. I parked at the trailhead just before noon. The hike wasn't too bad. 4 miles through pine and beech forest, with the usual switchbacks and leaf-covered roots ready to trip you up. I made it to the reservoir site around 3. It was even quieter than I expected. No wind, no birdsong, just a gentle lapping of water and the distant creak of trees shifting in the breeze. The clearing itself was perfect, flat, dry, with a soft bed of pine needles. I pitched my tent about 20 feet from the shore, got a small fire going. The sun was starting to dip behind the ridge across the lake. turning the surface a deep orange. That's when I saw him, a figure just standing at the far end of the water line. He was distant, maybe 200 yards off, standing perfectly still on a stretch of exposed mud flat. I figured it was another hiker, maybe someone fishing, though he didn't have a rod. He was just watching the water, watching it like he was waiting for something. I waved. He didn't wave back. He didn't move at all. I turned my attention back to my fire and tried not to dwell on it. Plenty of people enjoy this solitude out here. Maybe he just didn't feel like being social. No crime in that. By the time darkness fell, he was gone. Or at least I couldn't see him anymore. The forest gets real quiet at night. You start hearing things. Branches cracking, leaves rustling, owls hunting in the trees. Most of the time you can explain it. Most of the time. That night, just after midnight, I woke up to the sound of water splashing. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, coming down to drink, but the sound wasn't consistent with hooves. It was slow, slosh, slosh, like someone wading through the shallows. I sat up, heart racing, unzipped the tent and peeked out. Moonlight filtered through the clouds, just enough to see the glint of water. And there he was, the same man, standing ankle-deep in the reservoir, maybe 30 feet from shore. He was facing me now. Not moving, just watching. I stayed perfectly still, half convinced I was dreaming. But then he stepped forward. One slow, deliberate stride. The splash echoed across the clearing. I ducked back into the tent and grabbed my flashlight. When I flicked it on and shone it toward the water, he was gone. Just ripples and silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept the flashlight on and the zipper half open, eyes darting toward the trees and the water. But nothing else happened. Not until morning. When I stepped out of the tent, I found footprints in the mud. Bare feet, large ones. They came out of the water and stopped maybe 10 feet from where I'd been sleeping. No prints going back. I packed up faster than I ever have before. As I was stuffing my gear into my pack, I noticed something stuck to the side of my tent. It was a bundle of river grass tied with a strip of cloth. The grass was still wet. I hiked back to the trailhead without stopping. Every crunch of a leaf, every gust of wind had my nerves on edge. I didn't see anyone else the whole way out. When I got to my car, I threw my gear in the trunk and started the engine, hands shaking on the wheel. But the weirdest part? When I got home and checked the map, the high-resolution, topographical one I'd downloaded before the trip, I noticed something. There was no reservoir. The site I camped at? It wasn't listed as having any body of water, just old forest. The photos I'd seen online? Gone. The post had been removed. And every time I tell this story, someone always asks the same thing. Are you sure you weren't just hallucinating? Dreaming? Yeah, I'm sure, because that bundle of river grass, it's still in my garage, still damp, and I never found out where it came from. In the fall of 2020, I booked a secluded cabin in the Ozarks. It was the first trip I'd taken alone since my divorce, and I wanted something quiet. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just me, a few good books, and the woods. The listing promised complete solitude. No neighbors within 5 miles, it said. That was the selling point. The drive was long. Dirt roads turned to gravel to something that barely passed for a path. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was setting behind the trees. The place was small, 1 room, wood stove, wraparound porch, and a fire pit about 10 yards out. Behind it, just forest. Endless, layered forest. Inside, everything was simple but tidy. A cot, a table, a propane lantern. A lock on the door, both knob and deadbolt. I checked them twice that first night, more out of habit than worry. The first day passed peacefully. I chopped wood, read a little, made coffee on the old camp stove, and walked the edge of the tree line, where the forest dropped into a steep ravine. The quiet was overwhelming at times. I'd grown so used to background noise, the hum of city life, that this kind of silence made every creak of a branch feel like it meant something. That night it rained. Just a light drizzle at first, then steady, soaking cold. I stoked the fire in the stove, zipped up in my sleeping bag, and let the sound of rain on the roof lull me to sleep. It was a knock that woke me. 2 knocks, slow, deliberate. I sat up straight, disoriented. The stove had gone out. The lantern, too. The cabin was pitch black. Knock, knock. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was outside. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it toward the door. Nothing, just wood grain and shadows. I didn't move for what felt like 10 minutes. I just stared. My brain was scrambling for explanations. A branch? An animal? But that sound had been exactly 2 knuckles on wood. I finally worked up the courage to move toward the window and shine the flashlight out into the rain. No one, no footprints. No sound but the storm. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I had almost convinced myself it was a dream. Auditory hallucinations are common when you're somewhere that quiet. That's what I told myself. I spent the day trying to shake it off. Hiked a bit, read. But every time I looked at the door, I remembered that sound. That night I double-checked everything, locked the door, barricaded it with the table. I even pulled the cot across it for good measure. The rain had stopped, but the wind picked up. It howled through the trees, moaning in the eaves. I stayed awake far too long, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak. Just as I started to drift off, knock, knock, same rhythm, same weight. 2 knocks. No more. I leapt out of the sleeping bag and pointed the flashlight at the door again. Nothing moved. I held my breath, waited, and then something slid under the door. It was a folded piece of paper. I stared at it for a long time before I got close enough to pick it up. It was damp, the ink running slightly. Only 4 words were written on it. You shouldn't be here. I didn't waste time after that. I grabbed my pack, didn't bother to fold the sleeping bag, and stuffed what I could into my duffel. It was still dark out, but I didn't care. I was hiking out. I didn't make it back to my car until after sunrise. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I expected to see someone following, but I didn't. There were no other vehicles in the lot. No other footprints on the trail. Told the ranger at the welcome station. He just frowned and said, "That cabin hasn't been rented out in months." I showed him my reservation. The listing was gone. My confirmation email vanished from my inbox. The rental site didn't recognize my login. It's been 4 years. I don't know who knocked. I don't know how they knew I'd be there. But I've never gone back to the Ozarks, and I never will. In the fall of 2018, I took a solo trip into the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. I'd been working a brutal schedule at the hospital for the last 6 months and needed to disconnect from everything. No emails, no phone, no people. Just trees, firelight, and silence. I didn't want to deal with campsites or trail traffic, so I planned to bushwhack a few miles off the beaten path and set up camp near a spot I'd marked on my map, an old Forest Service road that hadn't been used in decades, right on the edge of a low ridge overlooking a stream. I'd parked my car near the ranger gate, shouldered my pack, and started the hike in. It was early October. The leaves had started to turn, and the forest smelled like cold earth and damp moss. By the time I reached the spot, the sun was dipping low. I set up my tent beneath a wide-armed oak, filtered some water from the stream, and made a fire. The first night was uneventful. The sounds of the forest at night were comforting. Crickets, owls, the distant splash of a fish in the stream. I fell asleep quickly, the kind of sleep that only comes after hours of fresh air and physical exertion. It wasn't until the second night that things started to get strange. I was sitting by the fire, eating a dehydrated meal and sipping coffee, when I saw a light flicker through the trees. It wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't a fire. It was soft, warm yellow, like a lantern. It bobbed slowly, weaving between the trees about 100 yards away, barely visible between the trunks. At first, I thought it might be another camper or maybe a hunter who got turned around. I stood up and called out. No answer. The light kept moving, not closer, not away, just drifting between the trees like it was pacing. Something about it felt wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I had the sudden, strong urge not to follow it. I sat back down, trying to shake it off. Maybe someone was night hiking with an old lantern. Maybe I was overtired and imagining things, but the light kept returning. Every night, just after dark, it would appear, always from the same direction, always drifting silently through the trees. I never heard footsteps, never saw a silhouette, just that dim, flickering glow, hovering, waiting. I stopped calling out. I stopped trying to explain it. By the third night, I started to notice other things. Stones stacked in small piles near my tent. Twigs tied together in strange shapes. Once, a dead rabbit with no visible wounds laid neatly in the center of my campsite. Each time I found something, the light appeared again, and each time it lingered longer. I tried moving camp, hiked nearly 3 miles west, and set up near a small bluff overlooking a ravine. I didn't make a fire that night. I just sat in the dark, wrapped in my sleeping bag, watching the woods. And still, the light came. Same warm glow. Same slow movement between the trees. It stopped just beyond the edge of the bluff. I couldn't see what was behind it, whether it was hanging from something or someone, but the way it hovered there, just barely swaying, made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I was already packed. I hiked hard and fast, cutting a new trail back to my car. I didn't stop for water, didn't eat, just moved. When I finally reached the lot, my car was there, untouched. But tied to my driver's side mirror was a small bundle of twigs, bound in the same pattern I'd seen before. A perfect triangle wrapped in sinew. I grabbed it, threw it into the woods, and drove. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about the light. I kept glancing at the window, expecting to see that same warm glow drifting outside. A few days later, I mentioned it to a ranger while asking about the old forest service road. He didn't say much, just leaned back in his chair, scratched his jaw, and said, "Locals say if you see a lantern in the woods, don't follow it. That path doesn't go where you think it does." I asked him what that meant. He just shrugged. I wouldn't go back there, is all. I never did. It was late September 2021 when I went hiking up near Red Bluff Canyon in Wyoming. I'd done that stretch before, remote, beautiful, and just desolate enough to make you feel like the last person on earth. That was the appeal. I wanted silence. I wanted space. I'd just gotten out of a long relationship and was looking to clear my head with 4 days of trail, trees, and thin mountain air. There was a loop trail that spanned just under 30 miles. My plan was to do 8 to 10 miles a day, set up camp each night in a different spot, and be back at my truck by the 5th morning. I packed light but smart tent, food, bear spray, first aid, map, compass, all the basics. The first 2 days were uneventful in the best way. I saw elk, a few hawks, and one massive moose in the distance that gave me a long stare before vanishing into the trees. No people, not even the distant sound of a car or plane. Just wind, birds, and the crunch of boots on dirt. It wasn't until the 3rd night that things started feeling off. I'd made camp in a small hollow just off the trail, surrounded by boulders and tall pines. The sun had dipped behind the canyon wall, and the shadows were long and cold. I got a small fire going, boiled some water, and was finishing dinner when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the trail above. At first I thought maybe it was another hiker, but I hadn't seen a soul in 3 days. I killed the fire out of instinct and listened. The steps stopped just past the ridge right where the trail curved around the hollow. Then nothing. I waited maybe 10 minutes, standing perfectly still, trying to hear anything, a cough, the clink of gear, even a bird, but the woods had gone dead silent. Finally I called out, "Hey there, you okay?" No response. I climbed halfway up the ridge and shone my flashlight through the trees, sweeping the beam back and forth. There was no one there, no gear, no movement, no sound, just empty trail. I slept light that night, bear spray in one hand and my knife in the other. Every crack of a twig made my heart lurch, but nothing happened. By morning, it felt like maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I imagined the footsteps, but then I found the tracks, boot prints, just one set, leading down from the trail to my camp and back up again. Whoever it was had come right up to my tent and left without a word, no note, no gear left behind, just footprints. I packed up immediately and hiked fast that day, covering almost 15 miles before setting up camp near a rocky outcrop that gave me a view of the trail in both directions. I figured if someone was following me, I'd see them coming. I didn't build a fire that night. I didn't even cook dinner. I just sat in the dark watching, and that's when I saw it. A figure maybe 100 yards away, just off the trail, standing between two pines. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. It was too far to see any details. No light, no sound, just a black silhouette against the trees. I watched it for nearly an hour. It never moved. I finally crawled into my tent, leaving the flap unzipped so I could keep looking. When I woke up just before dawn, the figure was gone, but there were more boot prints. This time they circled my tent twice before heading back into the woods. I didn't waste time packing up. I skipped breakfast, left the tent poles behind, and practically jogged the last stretch of trail back to the parking area. I didn't stop to rest, didn't look back. When I reached my truck, I slammed the doors and locked them immediately. That's when I saw the scratch. Just one. Long, shallow, running the length of my driver's side door. It wasn't deep, not enough to be from a branch. It looked intentional. I drove straight back to town and didn't talk to anyone about it for weeks. I still don't know who was out there. I've gone back over every step of that trip in my mind. Nothing I did should have drawn that kind of attention. I followed the rules, left no trace, stayed on the trail. But someone or something was watching, and it wasn't friendly. I've always believed that the forest keeps its secrets, not out of malice, but out of indifference. It doesn't care what happens beneath its canopy. It just grows and breathes and waits. Last September, I took a solo trip up into a patch of national forest land in Montana I'd been eyeing for a while. I'm not a survivalist or anything extreme. I just like the quiet. The older I get, the more I crave that silence you can only find miles from the nearest paved road. No phone service, no chatter, just wind and birds and the crunch of pine needles under your boots. The trailhead wasn't even official. I'd found it mentioned on a forum, an old fire access road that wound its way up into the woods and eventually opened onto a small lake. No name on the map, just coordinates. It sounded perfect. I parked my truck in a dirt pull-off that barely looked like a parking spot, loaded up my pack, and started the hike in. It was about 6 miles up, mostly gentle incline. Cool air, just the start of fall. You know that smell the forest gets in September? Like earth and bark and something dying sweetly in the soil. I loved it. The lake was as promised, silent, still, and completely alone. I set up camp on the north side, right where the tree line ended in a steep drop down to the water. Pitched my tent, filtered some water, and got a fire going as the sun started to dip behind the ridgeline. That first night was uneventful. I sat by the fire, ate some freeze-dried lasagna, read a little. Then I crawled into my tent and let the cold lull me to sleep. I woke up just after 3 a.m. to a sound I couldn't place. Not an animal, not wind. It was rhythmic, soft, like something dragging through the dirt in short bursts. She paused. I sat up slowly, heart already starting to pick up. I reached for my headlamp, but didn't turn it on yet. I didn't want to ruin my night vision. I just listened. The sound was maybe 20 feet from my tent, just off the trail I'd used coming in. It was steady, moving slowly, not heavy enough for a bear, not fast enough for a deer. Eventually, it stopped completely. The silence returned. But it wasn't the kind of silence you feel good in. It was that tight, pressing quiet that seems to listen back. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning came, I checked around my tent. No prints. Nothing disturbed. I told myself it was a porcupine or some raccoon rummaging around, but that didn't sit right. The dragging had been too smooth, too consistent, like something being pulled. I hiked a bit that day, circled the lake, tried to enjoy the sunshine, but I kept looking over my shoulder. That feeling of being watched wasn't going away. That night I built a bigger fire, sat closer to it. I had my hatchet and knife right beside me, just in case. And again, around 3:15 a.m., the sound came back. She paused. She paused. But this time it came from the opposite side of camp, not near the trail, near the tree line just behind my tent. I froze. The dragging was closer now, slower. Then it stopped. I don't know what made me do it, but I reached for my headlamp, flicked it on, and unzipped the tent as quietly as I could. I poked my head out and swept the light across the woods. Nothing. But when I turned to shine it back toward the trees behind my tent, my breath caught. There were grooves in the dirt. 4 of them, 2 side by side, about 3 feet apart, like someone had been walking with something heavy dragging behind them. They led from the woods right up to the edge of my tent, and then they stopped. No sign of who or what made them, just those parallel marks in the dirt. I packed up at first light, didn't bother making breakfast, just shoved everything into my pack and started the hike back down. I didn't run, but I moved fast. Every step felt like it echoed through the trees. I kept thinking I'd hear it again, that soft, steady drag behind me. There's no ending here, no twist. I never found out what made those sounds. I never saw anything, never heard another report from anyone who camped up near that lake, but I never went back. And I don't camp alone anymore, because I can still hear it sometimes in that space between sleep and waking. She paused. She paused. It was supposed to be a working weekend. I'd fallen behind on a few freelance writing deadlines, and between the distractions of home, spotty Wi-Fi, and a neighbor who never stopped mowing something, I needed a reset. A friend of mine had a cabin in northern Idaho, one of those places they only used a few times a year. No internet, no neighbors, just a lake, a wood stove, and enough quiet to hear your own heartbeat. He tossed me the key and said, "You'll get more done in 2 days there than you would in 2 weeks at home." He wasn't wrong. For the first 24 hours, it was perfect. I got there late Friday morning. The drive was long and winding, but beautiful. The road narrowed to a gravel path about a mile before the cabin, and the trees grew so thick you barely saw daylight between them. When I pulled up, the place looked exactly like the picture's simple, single-story wooden porch and nothing but forest in every direction. I brought in my bags, made some coffee on the old gas stove, and got to work at the little desk near the front window. Time slipped away fast. By the time I looked up, the sun was already sliding behind the trees. I hadn't brought much food, just a cooler with some groceries, but I made a quick dinner and settled in by the fire with my laptop. It wasn't until I went to bed that the feeling crept in. You know that feeling like someone else is in the room, like the space you're in just isn't empty. I chalked it up to being alone in a place that was too quiet. My brain wasn't used to the silence. I turned over and forced myself to sleep. The next morning I found the front door unlocked. I was sure, absolutely sure, I'd locked it the night before. It's a habit. I live in the city. I lock everything, twice. But when I went to make coffee, the door was just open. Not wide, not swinging in the breeze, just unlatched. Pulled shut, but not locked. I told myself I'd forgotten. I was tired, distracted, maybe a little spooked being alone out here. But it stuck in the back of my mind like a sliver under the skin. I wrote most of the day. Words came easier with the windows cracked, cool forced air drifting in. I barely even noticed the shadows getting long again. That night I was more careful. I double-checked the doors, the windows, even propped a chair against the inside of the front door just in case. I left the fire burning low and turned in around midnight. Sometime after 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound, faint, soft, like the floor creaking under slow, careful steps. At first, I thought it was the wood stove cooling down, but then I heard it again, closer this time, another creak, and another. I didn't move. I just listened. My breath caught in my throat. The cabin's floorboards made a very particular sound when you stepped on them, especially near the entryway. These weren't random pops or settling noises. Someone was walking, and they were trying not to be heard. I sat up slowly and listened harder. Silence. Then the faintest sound, the squeak of a doorknob turning. But I had locked everything, hadn't I? I grabbed the flashlight from beside the bed, clicked it on, and stepped out into the main room. Empty. The door was closed. The chair was still there. The windows were shut. But the cabin didn't feel empty. The air was different, stale, heavy. I checked every room, every corner, even under the bed and in the coat closet. No one. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat by the wood stove with my flashlight and a fireplace poker. heart hammering. When dawn finally broke, I made the decision to leave. I packed fast, tossed everything into the car, but before I locked up, I walked through one last time, and that's when I noticed it. A coffee mug one I hadn't used was sitting in the sink. Just one, rinsed but not clean, still wet. I hadn't touched that one. I was sure of it. I stared at it for a long time, like it might offer an answer. Then I left. I didn't tell my friend what happened, not really. Just said thanks, great place, got a lot done. He texted me the next week after going up there himself, said something weird had happened, asked if I'd brought anyone with me. I told him no, of course not. I was alone. He didn't reply right away. Then he sent one more message. The back door was unlocked, and there was fresh mud on the floor. Cabin was empty when I got here. I haven't been back. My name is Rowan Pierce. I'm 33, and this happened just last October. I'd been on the road for about 5 months, living in a weathered Class C RV I bought with what little savings I had left. After walking away from a job I hated and a relationship that left me more hollow than whole. I wasn't looking for ghosts. I wasn't chasing cryptids or filming a paranormal podcast like half the van lifers on YouTube. I just wanted quiet, open skies. A place where my brain wouldn't buzz like a swarm of hornets every time I sat still. The southern Appalachian Mountains called to me misty hollows, golden leaves, air that smelled like old stories. I figured I'd boondock somewhere near Crooked Hollow Road, a forested stretch about an hour from the Virginia border. I'd read online that it was forgotten, unpaved, and perfect. I should have known better the moment my GPS glitched out. The pavement gave way to gravel, then gravel gave way to moss-covered stones and tire-swallowing ruts. But the trees, God, the trees were beautiful. Hickories and poplars reaching over the road like cathedral rafters. The deeper I went, the more I convinced myself this was exactly what I'd been craving. I parked on a sloped clearing just off the road. There was a rotted old fence post marking a narrow deer trail that disappeared into the woods. No signs, no cabins, no other vehicles. Just me, the forest, and the quiet kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke to flickering light outside. I thought at first it was a campfire or lightning, but when I looked out the fogged window, I saw them 3 pale lights floating just beyond the tree line. They moved like fireflies, but pulsed too slow, too deliberate. They hovered, sank low to the ground, then blinked out, only to reappear a little closer. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I convinced myself it was swamp gas or distant hikers with headlamps. I checked my phone. No signal, not even a bar. The only bar I'd seen in days was a rusting license plate nailed to a tree reading, "Stay on the road." That second night, the lights returned. This time they came closer. They drifted between trees, no higher than my chest. I tried to film them, but my camera wouldn't focus. They pulsed with a bluish hue, rhythmically 1, 2, 3. The same pattern. Always 3, then silence, then gone. Buddy, my dog, a big black lab mix, refused to leave the RV. He stared at the window and growled, low and constant. His hackles never went down. I told myself I'd leave at first light. But when dawn came, the RV wouldn't start. Battery was drained, brand new, only 2 months old. I tried my backup jumper pack. Dead. When I popped the hood, I found something I still can't explain. A sticky residue across the battery terminals, thick and black, like congealed ink. No smell, no explanation. I didn't panic yet. Not until I checked my water tank. Empty, bone dry. That afternoon I heard whistling from the woods. Not birdsong, not wind. Just a soft, rising tone that circled the RV like someone pacing. I kept the doors locked. Buddy didn't bark this time. He just whined and curled against my legs, trembling like a leaf. That evening, just before sunset, I noticed something new carved into the side of a tree about 30 yards out. 3 circles, perfectly etched, 1 on top, 2 below. Like a triangle, like a face. That night I didn't sleep. The lights came again, closer than before. They hovered just outside my door, casting long shadows across the floor of the RV. I swear I heard them whispering, not voices exactly, more like a song, soft and sickly sweet. I stuffed cotton in my ears and prayed. When I blinked, hours had passed. In the morning, there were muddy prints on the RV stairs. Small, barefoot, human-shaped, but with too many toes. I ran. I didn't care that the RV wouldn't start. I grabbed Buddy, stuffed a backpack with a few essentials, and hit the deer trail on foot, heading west, back toward where I thought the main road had to be. I didn't look back. I don't remember how far I walked. The forest felt like it was folding in on itself. Trees I swore I'd passed before. A creek that ran the wrong direction. The whistling returned, fainter but always nearby. I began to see the symbols carved into more trees, 3 circles, again and again. The sun stayed low, too low, like it refused to rise properly. When I finally stumbled into an old logging road, I collapsed. A hunter found me the next morning. I was dehydrated, scratched to hell, muttering about lights and symbols and things in the trees. He got me to a ranger station and from there to a clinic in town. They said I must have had some kind of psychotic break. Stress, maybe, isolation. But they never found my RV. They sent a team up Crooked Hollow Road. It didn't exist anymore. The satellite maps showed dense forest, no paths, no signs of tire tracks. The logging road I'd collapsed on wasn't on any records. The hunter who found me never came forward again. I haven't seen the lights since, but sometimes I'll be walking through town or lying awake at night, and I'll hear it, the faintest sound, just on the edge of hearing. 3 tones, whistled softly in the dark. My name is Ben Holloway, and I'm 36 years old. This happened 3 months ago when I took my RV through the Badlands of Utah, near a place the locals called Deville's Spine. I'd been working as a freelance geologist for over a decade, mostly mapping rock strata and photographing erosion patterns for academic journals that barely paid rent. When funding dried up on my latest project, I figured I'd use the downtime to explore the lesser-known ridges out by San Juan County. Nothing like raw, ancient earth to reset your brain. I'd driven through 100 lifeless miles of dust before I even saw another car. That suited me just fine. I was there for silence, sunsets, solitude. The RV was a 1991 Gulfstream Conquest that I'd patched together myself over the years. It ran hot in the desert, and the fridge only worked when it felt like it, but it was mine. On day 2, I pulled off a dirt road with no signage, somewhere near the ghost town of Granger's Hollow. My GPS had gone useless 10 miles back, but I had a physical topographic map, and that was enough. The plateau I camped on was stunning. Bone-dry red clay, hoodoos in the distance casting long shadows like sentinels. I was the only soul out there, or so I thought. The first night, the wind was relentless. I cooked dinner with the windows shut, listening to it moan across the rocks. Around midnight, I heard a strange tapping, not from the wind, but from the back of the RV. I figured maybe a loose panel, something shifting with the gusts. I ignored it. Then, a few hours later, my dog Remy, a 10-year-old shepherd lab mix who'd seen every inch of country with me, let out a low growl. He never growled at wind. I flicked on the floodlight. Nothing. No animal tracks. No signs of movement. Just emptiness and cold stars overhead. By morning, I found something weird. About 20 yards from my RV, on a patch of hard-packed clay, were 3 indentations. Perfect circles, each about 6 inches across, and spaced too evenly to be natural. They weren't footprints, not human, not hoofed, not tire tracks. Just impressions, too clean, too deliberate. I took photos, measured them, even tried to brush one with a sample kit to see if it revealed anything in the sediment. But the impressions weren't in the clay, they were beneath it, as if something heavy had stood there and displaced the earth without breaking the surface. That night the tapping returned, louder, more insistent. It moved like knuckles dragging across the aluminum exterior. Remy barked once, then pressed against the door, tail low. I stood there, holding my mag light, not daring to open it. The desert was still outside, too still. The next morning, my generator was dead. It had been full the night before. I checked the fuel line. Slashed clean, not chewed, cut. Now I was uneasy. Maybe I'd stumbled onto some illegal dig site or tribal ground someone didn't want disturbed. I considered packing up and heading out, but curiosity and a dumb streak I've had since birth made me stay. That afternoon I hiked east toward a narrow canyon that had no name on my map. About a mile in, I found a rock carving, recent, not ancient. Just a spiral burned into the sandstone with something scorching hot. The edges were melted. I'd seen volcanic glass in Hawaii, and this looked like someone had tried to replicate that with a blowtorch. Nearby, more of those indentations, this time 5, arranged in a crescent shape. I snapped more pictures, and this time I noticed something else, the faint hum of electricity, like the static buzz before lightning. But the sky was clear. No storms on the horizon, not even clouds. That night, something stepped on the roof of my RV. You ever hear a grown man whimper? That was me, flashlight in one hand, flare gun in the other. Remy was losing his mind, barking and clawing at the closet door like he wanted to burrow inside. I climbed out the emergency exit on the floor, quiet, slow, praying I was wrong. I shined the light up. Nothing. Then a shadow moved behind the hoodoo, about 30 feet out. Something long, loping, wrong. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I tried to leave. The RV wouldn't start. Battery intact, wires untouched. No reason for failure. I'm not a superstitious guy, but something wanted me there. I rationed water. Tried to keep calm. Kept Remy close. That night, I set up a perimeter with those chemical light sticks I use for marking samples. Bright neon green. Supposed to last 12 hours. They all went dark within 30 minutes. No sound, no light. Just darkness pressing in and the hum. That buzz again, now louder. Then I heard my voice, outside. It called Remy's name, in my exact tone. "Remy, come, boy." "Remy, come, boy," he growled. Didn't move. Smart dog. It kept calling, repeating the name. Louder, slower, twisted like a recording melting in heat. I sat there, shaking, with the flare gun aimed at the door. I don't remember sleeping, but at some point, dawn broke, and with it came silence. Real silence. The buzz was gone. The RV started on the first try. I didn't stop driving until I hit a truck stop outside Moab. I called a mechanic. He looked it over, said it was fine. Nothing wrong. Back home, I went through the photos I took. The spiral symbol on the stone? Gone. But in two of the images, barely visible behind the shadow of a mesa, is a figure. Slender, tall, bent at the middle like it didn't understand how joints worked. It's facing the camera. I didn't take that shot. And Remy still flinches at the sound of my own voice when I say his name. My name is Cody Ellison, and I'm 33 years old. This happened last September when I took my RV up into the far reaches of eastern Washington, Okanogan County, near the Canadian border. I'd been living out of the RV for a couple of months by then, chasing quiet, remote stretches of wilderness to reset after a particularly brutal year. My plan was simple. Find a secluded lake, park for a few nights, maybe fish a little, maybe write. Instead, I found something buried in the forest that should have never been disturbed. I was following an old logging road I'd found on a topo map, one of those pale, gray lines that barely qualifies as a trail anymore. It hadn't seen regular traffic in years, but my RV could handle the ruts as long as I took it slow. After a couple of steep switchbacks and a series of washed-out culverts, I reached a clearing beside a long, narrow lake. The water was glassy and dark, framed by towering evergreens and steep hillsides. Not a single sign of another person, just the way I like it. I set up camp, grilled some trout I'd brought in from the last town, and watched the mist rise from the lake. There was a strange quiet about the place, like the forest was holding its breath. No bird song, no frogs, not even the buzz of mosquitoes. I chalked it up to the altitude or the time of year, but a little voice in the back of my mind whispered otherwise. That night, the fog rolled in thick. I mean thicker than I'd ever seen before blanketing the lake, the trees, the RV. Visibility was maybe 5 feet. I heard soft sounds outside, maybe dripping branches, maybe something walking in the woods. My motion light clicked on once, then again. even though nothing tripped the sensor. I figured it was bugs or weather interference. Tried to sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., woke up to scratching, not from the roof or the door, from underneath the RV. Long, slow scratches like something dragging claws across the metal undercarriage. I held my breath. It stopped after maybe 20 seconds. Then silence. The next morning I crawled under the RV with a flashlight. Found 3 long gouges in the frame. They weren't from rocks or branches too symmetrical, and too deep. I decided to give it one more night. I know how that sounds, but I was tired of running every time something weird happened. I figured if it got worse, I'd pack up in the morning. Before sunset, I hiked along the ridge behind the lake, trying to clear my head. About a mile in, I came across something I can barely describe. A pit. Perfectly circular, maybe 12 feet wide, lined with stones stacked, not natural. At the center, a crude wooden totem had been rammed into the soil. It looked old, very old, covered in ash and bones, dozens of them, animal, maybe. Not all of them. I don't know what compelled me to step closer. I wanted to leave. I should have left. But instead I snapped a photo on my phone and turned to walk away, and that's when I heard it. Something breathing, just behind me. The air went cold, dead quiet again. I spun, heart hammering, but the pit was empty. Still, I felt watched the entire way back. That night I slept with my knife under the pillow. Around 1 a.m., fog came back, thicker, wetting the windows, soaking the forest in that soupy, unnatural stillness. Then came the voice. It sounded like me. Not someone calling my name. My voice coming from outside the RV. Cody. It sounded like I was talking to myself. Muffled, wrong cadence. Like someone trying to learn how to talk like me. The same words over and over. Cody, let me in. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. It got closer. I could hear the footsteps, slow, heavy, circling the RV. The motion light flicked on, but all I could see through the fog was my own warped reflection in the condensation-streaked glass. Then the handle on the RV door clicked. I yelled, grabbed the knife, shouted out a warning. The sound stopped. 5 minutes later, something slammed into the rear of the RV so hard it knocked over my thermos. I didn't sleep after that. When dawn finally broke, I threw everything back into the RV and started the engine. I didn't stop until I hit pavement again, heart racing the whole time. The strangest part? When I finally looked at the photo I took of the pit, there was nothing there. Just forest, no stones, no totem, no bones. I still dream about that voice sometimes. And once, just once, I swear I heard it again while parked outside a gas station in Idaho, from the woods behind me. My own voice, calling my name. I didn't look. If you ever find a lake with no name up near the Okanogan woods, one where the birds don't sing and the fog rolls in too thick and too fast, just keep driving. Some places aren't empty. They're waiting. My name is Daniel Kessler, and I'm 45 years old. This happened in early October in a remote patch of pine forest near the Oregon coast. I'd been driving my RV through the Pacific Northwest, looking to clear my head after my brother's funeral. He and I used to take camping trips when we were kids, and I thought returning to the woods might help me reconnect with something. Memories, peace, maybe even closure. I'd mapped out a stretch of backcountry forest roads just off Highway 101, found a few promising spots with no cell signal, no traffic, just tall trees and the ocean's distant hush. The spot I finally settled on was tucked at the end of a forest service trail, barely wide enough for the RV to squeeze through. The trees were so thick they blotted out the sky. Moss clung to every trunk like the woods were swallowing them whole. Perfect, I thought. Quiet, green, and peaceful. Just what I needed. I set up camp, lit a small fire, and made a can of chili on my portable stove. I poured a little into a second bowl and set it on the log beside me, an old habit from when my brother and I camped together. He was always the first one to eat. Maybe it was silly. Maybe I was grieving in my own strange way. That night was colder than I expected. I woke up around a rustling noise outside. Not the usual breeze in the branches, kind more like shuffling footsteps. I froze, held my breath, and waited. Another sound. Like something brushing up against the side of the RV. I whispered, "Hello?" and peeked out the side window with my flashlight, sweeping it across the clearing. Empty. I figured it was a raccoon or maybe a deer and forced myself to go back to sleep. But in the morning I found something that made my stomach twist. That second bowl of chili I'd left out, gone. Not tipped over, not licked clean, just gone. The spoon was still on the log. I brushed it off. Maybe an animal dragged it into the woods. Weird, but not impossible. I stayed a second night. That evening, I explored a little deeper into the woods, following an old game trail. The trees got denser, the air colder. About a mile in, I found a small clearing with an overgrown fire ring and the rotted remains of a picnic table. There were bones scattered around small ones, maybe animal. At least that's what I told myself. Then I noticed something else. A name carved into the tree trunk beside the fire ring. Caleb Kessler, my brother's name, the exact same spelling. I stared at it for a long time. The carving was old, weathered, half-filled with moss, but it was there. My brother never mentioned being out here. I had no idea how this could exist. I ran back to the RV before dusk, locking every door behind me. That night I didn't sleep. At 3:12 a.m. I heard it again, the footsteps. Only this time they weren't slow. They were pacing, circling the RV, once, twice. Then came the knock, just 3 slow taps on the door. Then silence. I grabbed my flashlight and, against all better judgment, peeked out. No one, but there were boot prints in the dirt, and I swear to God they were the exact kind of boots my brother used to wear. I know because I have the same pair in the RV closet. I opened the door and looked around with the flashlight. The prints wandered off into the trees and vanished. The next morning I found another bowl. Not mine. An old ceramic one, chipped and cracked, sitting on the log where I'd left the chili the first night. It had a spoon in it. Not my spoon, either. I packed up that afternoon. I was halfway down the Forest Service road, bouncing over roots and potholes, when the engine sputtered and stalled. I checked the fuel plenty left. Battery was fine. Everything should have worked. Then I saw someone standing behind the tree line, just far enough I couldn't make out details. A man, about my height, wearing a red flannel, my brother's flannel. I yelled, "Who are you?" But he didn't move, just turned and walked deeper into the woods. I didn't follow. Eventually, after nearly an hour of cursing and trying everything I could, the engine roared back to life like nothing had happened. I got out of there and didn't look back. That was months ago. I haven't been able to shake it. When I checked my brother's old hiking logs and journals, I found a single entry from years back. October 12th. Took a wrong turn up north. Found an old fire ring. Felt like I'd been here before. Someone left food on a log. That's the part that gets me. Someone left food on a log. I haven't told anyone this until now. I don't know what I saw or who I met out there. Maybe grief plays tricks on the mind. Maybe something else waits in the deep woods, echoing the past. All I know is I still leave a bowl out when I camp, just in case. My name is Dylan Ross, and I'm 40 years old. This happened last October when my cousin, Jake, convinced me and two of his buddies to go camping up near Elkhead Pass in western Montana. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, and Jake swore the trip would help clear my head. Some hiking, whiskey around a fire, maybe a little elk spotting. I wish we'd stayed home. I wish we never stepped foot into that forest. The four of us were in Jake's beat-up Ford, towing a small camper, when we rolled past the final ranger station just before dusk. A heavy-set ranger named Luella waved us down. She warned us about recent bear activity near the upper ridge. We promised we'd stay smart, stick to trails, keep our food locked down. She nodded, but her expression stayed uneasy. "Don't follow strange lights," she added as we were pulling away. "Or voices. If you hear something that shouldn't be there, just head the other direction." We all kind of chuckled about it at the time. Jake muttered something about every ranger trying to be spooky this time of year. We were heading to an old hunting pull-off he'd been to a few years back, miles from the nearest campground. It was pitch dark by the time we parked and cracked open our first beers. We got a small fire going. Leaves rustled all around, and the forest was so dense that even the moonlight couldn't cut through. Something about the silence felt too heavy. No crickets, no owls, just the occasional snap of branches deeper in the woods. Probably deer, Jake said, but his eyes stayed on the dark. The first night passed with unease, but no real incidents. It was the second morning that things started to unravel. Alex, one of Jake's friends, a laid-back guy, ex-Marine, didn't come back from his early hike. He'd taken his camera and told us he'd be back by noon. By 1 o'clock, we started calling his name. By 2:30, we were pacing and arguing. Jake wanted to go out looking immediately. Vince, the third guy, was more cautious. What if he got turned around? He said, "Best to wait here in case he circles back." We waited another 2 hours, still nothing. That's when we made a plan. Vince would stay back and monitor the trail while Jake and I headed toward the ridge, the way Alex had been planning to go. We didn't make it far before we found his camera. It was lying lens down on a mossy rock, strap shredded, battery missing. The forest around it felt colder than before, quiet in a suffocating way. Jake kept calling Alex's name, but the way his voice bounced off the trees made me feel sick. That's when we saw the tracks. At first they looked human boot prints in the soft soil, but they got weird. The stride stretched too far. Then they shifted into something else entirely. Longer impressions. Toes, maybe. But not human. Jake and I locked eyes. He didn't say it, but I knew he was thinking it, too. Those weren't bare prints. We followed them further than we should have. The sun dipped low, and the trail curved along a narrow gorge. That's where we found the shirt. Alex's flannel, torn, dried blood crusted near the collar. I wanted to turn back, but just as I said so, we heard it, a voice. Help. It was faint, weak, but it was Alex's voice. We bolted toward it, slipping on moss and deadfall, shouting his name. Help me. The voice got clearer, but it was always just ahead, always out of reach. Then Jake stopped cold. He pointed toward a narrow clearing. A figure stood at the edge, half in shadow, shirtless, arms slack. It looked like Alex, but too tall, too wrong. He turned. Its face was hollowed, like it had been stretched too far across the skull, the eyes sunken and pale. But the worst part was the mouth. It opened impossibly wide as it screamed, and it wasn't Alex's voice anymore. It was something else, guttural, ancient, full of rage. We ran. Branches lashed at our faces. Roots grabbed our ankles. That scream followed us all the way back to camp. Vince was gone. His gear was still there, backpack half open, flashlight on the ground. No sign of struggle, just gone. Jake started to unravel. It's not real, he kept saying. It's some trick. Something's messing with us. We barely slept, took turns keeping watch. Every time the wind shifted, I thought I heard footsteps outside the camper. At some point deep into the night, Jake shook me awake. Do you hear that? He whispered. I did. Voices, multiple now, low, chanting maybe, from the trees. We killed the lights and stayed completely still. A shape passed by the camper window, then another. They didn't walk like animals. They glided. And their limbs, God, their arms were too long. Their necks bent at the wrong angles. We waited until dawn. At first light, we packed what little we could and bolted. I don't know how we found the trailhead again. It felt like the woods themselves shifted while we walked. At one point, Jake broke down completely, started muttering to himself, said he could hear Vince laughing behind us, but there was no one there. We didn't stop until we hit the ranger station. Ranger Luella saw our condition and brought us inside. Jake was nearly catatonic. I could barely form words, but she didn't look surprised. She sat us down, gave us water, then said something I'll never forget. Sometimes the forest doesn't want visitors, especially when they stray too far. Sometimes it shows them things, uses voices to bring them in, faces they recognize. She paused. If you made it out, it means you didn't follow too far. That's lucky. Not everyone makes that choice. Jake doesn't talk about it anymore. He moved to a city, says he never wants to see another tree again. I get it. Vince and Alex were never found. Search parties came up empty. No signs, no bodies, just equipment left in places it shouldn't be. Sometimes at night I still hear that voice in my dreams. Help me, but I know better now. That thing in the woods wore Alex's face, and whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. My name is Charlie Nunez, and I'm 41 years old. This happened just 6 weeks ago when I took my RV into the Jornada del Muerto Basin in southern New Mexico. I'd been chasing the perfect night sky for my amateur astronomy blog, and I figured nothing would beat the vast, unpolluted heavens above the high desert. No noise, no light, no people. It sounded like a dream. It became a nightmare. The first couple of nights were incredible. The stars looked like diamonds flung across ink. I got breathtaking shots of the Milky Way arching over the basalt ridges. I even spotted a meteor burst that had me grinning like a kid. But then the wind shifted. It brought with it a foul, earthy rot. Not just decay, but something wrong. It lingered, like it wanted to be noticed. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to distant livestock or desert carrion. But that same night I heard movement. Not animals scurrying, not coyotes yipping, but a dragging sound, slow, deliberate, circling the RV. I turned off every light, crouched by the door with my flashlight and a tire iron. My heart pounded in my ears. Then the whispering started, a rhythmic chant I couldn't understand. At first I thought it was just wind scraping rocks, but it had cadence, structure. I peeked out the window, and that's when I saw her. A woman, naked, filthy, long hair like soaked vines hung over her face. Her skin looked gray under the moonlight, stretched too tightly over bones that didn't align right. Her spine bowed unnaturally as she crept along the edge of the clearing. She was whispering to the dirt, chanting in a language I'd never heard. I locked the door and backed away. The air inside the RV turned heavy, like it didn't want me breathing it. The lights flickered, then died. My generator, fully charged, sputtered like it was choking. I stayed awake until dawn, tire iron in hand. When the sun came up, she was gone, no footprints. No sign anyone had been there, but my generator's casing was covered in soot-like ash, and around the RV, something had scratched symbols into the dirt. Circles with jagged, intersecting lines. I took pictures, heart-hammering. I planned to leave immediately, but the RV wouldn't start. I popped the hood. Every wire had been cut, cleanly, as if with surgical tools. My satellite phone was dead too, despite being fully charged the day before. Desperation clawed at me. I was stuck miles from the highway with no way to contact anyone. And then I heard her chant again. Fainter this time. Coming from behind the ridge, I grabbed my crowbar, flashlight, and camera. Maybe I thought I could find the source of the symbols, figure out what she wanted, or just see if it was some elaborate trick, anything to make sense of it. I followed the sound, weaving through crumbling rock and gnarled juniper. The chanting grew louder. I came upon a stone altar, old, weathered, sunken into the desert floor. More symbols carved into its surface. Bones lay scattered around it, some animal, some not. The woman stood behind the altar. She turned. Her eyes were milk white, empty, her mouth opened wider than any mouth should, and her scream was like shattered metal. I dropped my flashlight, but the camera hung from my neck. By reflex, I snapped a photo. The flash lit her up and she recoiled, shrieking, covering her eyes. I didn't wait. I sprinted back through the rocks, lungs burning. I could hear her chasing me, limbs snapping like dry twigs. I reached the RV, dove inside, slammed the door. She slammed against it a second later. I scrambled for anything and my foot hit the fire extinguisher. I yanked it up, cracked the back window, and sprayed it straight at her. The white cloud enveloped her shrieking form. And then she vanished, collapsed into dust. I swear to God, like she was never solid to begin with. The air lightened. The silence returned. It still took hours before I could get the RV to even sputter. I had to hotwire it using spare jumper cables and half-melted clamps. When the engine finally kicked, I drove non-stop until I reached the edge of Las Cruces. I showed the photo to a ranger. He turned pale, told me not to share it around, said there were petroglyphs in the basin that had been sealed off for decades, symbols, warning of a desert witch, one who fed on the lost. He called her La Polvereda, the dust woman. I don't know what I saw, what I fought. All I know is this. If you're in the Jornada del Muerto and you hear whispering in the sand, do not follow it. And if you see symbols carved into the rock, scrape them out. Something old lives out there, and it wants to be remembered. My name is Riley Brooks, and I'm 33 years old. This happened just a few months ago, in late autumn, when I was driving my old RV along the Oregon coast, trying to get over the kind of heartbreak that doesn't leave clean. My fiancé left me the week before our wedding, no explanation, no final conversation, just gone. So I took my camera, my journals, and the old dog-eared trail maps, and hit the road, telling myself the salt air might heal something in me. Braxton Cove was a name I saw scribbled in pencil on the back of a rest stop flyer. Not an official destination, not on any of the ranger brochures, but it was close to the coast, and I'd always preferred the places that weren't on tourist maps. The idea of silence and sea cliffs called to something raw inside me. The drive was all winding roads and slanted trees, with fog gathering in every dip like it was alive. I had to drive with my high beams on even at noon. When I reached the turnoff, a barely visible dirt path half-eaten by moss, I should have turned around. But the map showed a bluff that looked like a perfect place to camp. It was as if the fog parted just enough to let me in, like the coast had decided to make room for me. The site itself wasn't much, just a flattened stretch of rocky ground facing the Pacific, with a handful of wind-ravaged pine trees leaning toward the water, like they were trying to listen to something out there. I parked the RV, stepped outside, and let the wind wrap around me. It smelled like seaweed, salt, and something older. That night I sat by a small fire in the fire pit someone else had left behind, just blackened stones in a loose circle. I cracked open a beer, wrote a few half-hearted journal lines, and listened to the ocean. It didn't crash here like it did on the beaches I was used to. It murmured, low and steady, almost like whispering. I heard it for the first time just after midnight. At first I thought it was the wind in the trees, but it was too rhythmic. A soft, dragging sound like someone pulling their feet through gravel. Then the faint creak of something wooden, like an old ship's hull rocking in place. I killed the fire and stood, listening. Buddy, my golden retriever, was already alert, staring into the fog that had crept up while I wasn't looking. It was thicker now, cold, almost damp. I heard the sound again closer this time. Something walking along the edge of the cliff path, but there were no voices. Just footsteps, slow, dragging, uneven. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" No response, just silence, and then that same creaking noise again, like a boat tethered to something beneath the ground. I shined my flashlight into the fog and saw nothing. But Buddy growled a sound I'd never heard from him before. Low, guttural, not playful, protective. We slept inside the RV that night, but barely. Every hour or so I'd hear the steps again, circling the RV just beyond the windows. I'd flash my light out, but I never saw anyone. Only the fog pressed against the glass. The next morning I found footprints, bare feet, no shoes. Just long, thin impressions in the sandy soil, spaced weirdly apart, too far to be human. But what chilled me most was how the footprints didn't lead to the RV or away from it. They just started near the door and ended near the back tires, like something had been standing there, watching, then vanished. I decided to leave, but when I turned the key, the RV engine just clicked. Battery was drained, though I'd checked it the day before, and it had been fine. I tried again. Nothing. Effing. So I packed a bag, leashed Buddy, and started down the trail toward where I'd seen a marked ranger station 10 miles south. We hiked 2 hours, and I swear the fog followed. It didn't lift like I expected. It thickened, pressed down until I couldn't even see the tops of trees. Every now and then I'd hear those steps again, not on the path, but to the side, just far enough to keep me guessing. That's when we found the shack. It wasn't on any map, old, rotting, wood bowed inward from years of damp wind, but it was standing just off the trail. I stepped inside thinking maybe there was a phone or at least a place to write a note. Instead, I found bones. Small ones, dozens of them, hanging from the rafters on string. Some looked like bird bones, others, I don't know, something else, carved with tiny symbols, circles with slashes, eyes. There were words carved into the floorboards, too, beneath a collapsed chair. Just 4 words burned into the wood. Walk backward in fog. Before I could even process that, Buddy started barking feral, panicked, backing toward the door. Something was coming. I swear I could feel it in my teeth, a low hum vibrating through the walls. The fog outside had turned dark. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't just gray anymore. It was darker than dusk, like night had dropped early, and inside it I saw movement, shapes tall and thin, like broken people dragging ropes behind them. Buddy bolted out of the shack, and I chased him. We ran blindly through that mist, guided only by his barking. I didn't stop until we saw the shape of the RV again. But when we reached it, the door was open, and the inside was wet. Something had been inside. Water pooled on the floor like someone had walked in, dripping. And carved into the mirror above the kitchenette was a single phrase I hadn't seen before. "You are already one of us." I locked the RV door even though some part of me already knew it wouldn't help. Whatever had been inside didn't need to break in. It had simply entered, like the fog itself. Buddy wouldn't stop pacing. His nails clicked across the vinyl floor, and every few seconds he'd stop and stare at the mirror with that carved phrase, "You are already one of us." I wanted to believe it was a sick prank, that someone had hiked in through the trees, sabotaged the RV, waited for me to leave, and snuck in. I even tried saying that out loud, but my own voice sounded small and fake in the silence. That night, the fog didn't retreat. It pressed harder against the RV, curling around the windows in thick, coiling tendrils. I heard the footsteps again, louder this time, dragging something heavy. Chains, maybe, and something else, something clicking, like bone knocking against wood. Buddy growled, pressed up against the door like he wanted to keep whatever it was out. I sat in the dark, clutching my flashlight, but when I tried to turn it on, it wouldn't work. Fresh batteries, brand new, dead. At some point, maybe 3 in the morning, I started hearing voices. They weren't outside. They were coming from the mirror. It started as a whisper, so soft I thought it was just the wind. But then I heard words. My name, Riley, over and over. Spoken in my own voice, or a voice that used to be mine. Each time it said it, it sounded closer, fuller, like it was learning. I covered the mirror with a towel. That didn't stop the voice. I must have passed out because I woke to the faint smell of salt and something rotten, like old seaweed. My head throbbed. Buddy was gone. I leapt up, called for him, panic already flooding my chest. The door was ajar, and outside the world was dim. A dull gray glow that didn't feel like morning. Fog covered everything, like a skin. I called again, louder this time, and then I heard him. A single bark from far off toward the cliffs. I ran barefoot down the trail, the cold ground biting at my feet. The fog thinned a little near the cliff edge, and I could see the shape of Buddy standing at the edge, wagging his tail. But he wasn't facing me. He was staring out toward the water, at the figures. There were 6 of them, maybe 7, pale shapes out on the rocks, standing just above the crashing surf. They were tall and possibly thin, wearing clothing that hung off them like seaweed. Some were barefoot, others wearing mismatched shoes, and they were all facing the cliff, facing me. One stepped forward. Its walk was jerky, too long in the limbs. I thought it was wearing a hood, but then the fog peeled back for just a second, and I saw that it had no face. Just a wide slit of a mouth that didn't move when it spoke, because it did speak, but not out loud. It spoke inside my head. You saw us, you walked where we wait, and now the others stepped forward. You are one of the returned. I turned to run, called for Buddy. He didn't move, just sat there, tail wagging, like he didn't see what I saw. Like something had already called him home. I screamed his name, and that's when he came out of the fog. Or something that looked like me. He was wearing my face, my jacket, even had the same rip in the knee of my jeans. But the eyes were wrong, too wide, too dark, no recognition, just hunger. He smiled. "Buddy likes me now," he said in my voice. I ran. I don't remember how far. My lungs burned. My legs ached. I tripped at least once, scrambled up bloody-kneed, and didn't stop until I was back at the RV. The mirror towel was gone. In its place, written in condensation across the glass, "You can't run from yourself." I didn't sleep that night. The voices circled the RV like wolves. My own voice, dozens of it. They mocked. They coaxed. They laughed. At dawn, I managed to start the RV. Don't ask me how. The battery gauge flickered like it was dying, and the gas needle hovered just above empty. But the engine turned over. I drove until the fog thinned, until I hit a real road again. I didn't look back. I filed a report. Told a ranger someone had been stalking me at Braxton Cove. She just frowned and said, "No one camps there." Not since the disappearances in '98 disappearances. 2 hikers, a photographer, a local boy. All went up the cliff path. None came back. I asked if anyone else had seen anything strange. She looked at me too long, then said, "The locals call them the fog walkers, says they come back wrong, empty, but still walking." I asked if they'd ever found the bodies. She just said they were never looking for bodies. I've been back in the city for 3 months. I haven't seen Buddy, haven't even heard him barking in the distance. Sometimes I still hear voices when I'm alone in the shower or watching TV late at night. They always say the same thing. "You were the lucky one. You got out. So why do you keep looking back?" But the worst part, sometimes I see someone across the street who looks exactly like me. Not similar, exactly. And he smiles just once before walking into the fog. My name is Travis Holt. I'm 33, recently divorced, and currently living full-time in my RV. I used to work as a land surveyor in Colorado, but after everything fell apart with my ex, I left the house, the job, and the city behind. I figured I'd take a year off, drive across the country, and maybe find something out in the quiet that could help put the pieces back together. This happened about 5 months ago, in the stretch of nowhere between central Oregon and the Idaho border, where the forests get thick and the cell signal dies before the map even loads. I was driving a beat-up 1997 Winnebago, slow as hell on the uphill climbs, but reliable enough if I didn't push it too hard. I hadn't planned to stop at Hollow Pines. Hell, I hadn't even heard of it. It started with a wrong turn, literally. I meant to head south toward a lakeside campsite someone told me about, but I got twisted up on an unmarked fire road. The trees pressed in like a tunnel, and I thought I'd turn around after a few miles, but the road just kept going. Then I saw it, a small hand-painted wooden sign nailed to a split-rail fence that read, Hollow Pines private site. I should have turned back, but I didn't. The clearing was beautiful at first glance. A ring of towering pine trees surrounded a flat, grassy hollow. Someone had built a fire pit in the center and left an old stone bench nearby. There were no buildings, no signs of recent activity. It felt abandoned, but not forgotten. I parked the RV along the tree line, shut off the engine, and stepped outside into silence. Not peaceful silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you feel like something's holding its breath. I chalked it up to the remoteness. That night, I built a small fire, poured myself a whiskey, and sat outside under the stars. Uddy, my shepherd mix, lay at my feet. He's usually calm, but out here he was twitchy, staring into the woods like he expected something to step out. At one point he growled low and deep. I turned toward where he was looking. Just darkness, no movement, no sound. "You're freaking yourself out, bud," I muttered. But the truth is, I was too. That night I dreamed about trees. Not just standing there, but watching. There was a figure barely visible through the branches. Tall, thin, with something like antlers, but not quite. It stood just far enough away that I couldn't make out a face. When I tried to move, I couldn't. The air felt thick. I woke up drenched in sweat and found Buddy pacing by the door, whining. I went out to check and saw something that made my heart stop. Footprints, human, barefoot, circling the RV, only one set, and they vanished into the woods. I don't remember climbing back into the RV. I only remember the heat against my skin, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth, and the ache in my chest from trying not to scream. I must have blacked out for a while, because when I opened my eyes again, the sun was higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty field behind the church. Buddy was curled beside me, wide awake and staring at the door, like he was expecting something to return. The firewood in the corner was still damp. My camera was on the floor, battery drained, lens cracked. I thought maybe I'd imagined it all, maybe the thing we dug up was just some hallucination, baked into me by the heat and grief and loneliness. But when I stepped outside, there was a fresh mound of soil where the grave had been. The hole was filled in, and the shovel was gone. The church door was still open, swinging slightly in the breeze, but there were no bones, no burial cloth, nothing, just absence, like whatever was buried there had never been. And that was somehow worse. I told myself I'd pack up and leave right then. I even managed to toss a few things into the cabinets and clear the table off. But as I started the RV and tried to turn back down the gravel road that led into town, the steering wheel pulled stiff, and the dashboard lights flickered, then went dark. The engine stuttered once, twice, then cut out completely. Nothing. Dead. Buddy whined. I climbed out, popped the hood, and stared into a mess of corroded wires. The coolant hose had been severed, clean. Not chewed, not worn cut. A blade did this. Someone didn't want me leaving, or something. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried the emergency CB radio I kept under the seat, nothing but static. The nearest signal was probably miles away, and I didn't have enough water to hike it, not in this heat. By sunset, The sky turned red again, the exact same shade it had been when we first dug up that grave. The same hue that made the stained glass inside the church glow like a wound. I don't know why I went back in. Maybe I was hoping to find some answers. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. But when I stepped through those doors again, the smell hit me hard: mildew, rotting wood, and something else. Something sickly sweet, like spoiled meat. The pews were all gone. Every last one of them. Just gone. The whole center aisle had been cleared, the floorboards stripped away, revealing the bare dirt underneath. Deep gouges ran through the earth, like something had been dragged or crawled through it. At the front of the sanctuary, where the altar used to be, there was now a hole, fresh, wide, and waiting. I should have left. I should have turned and run and never looked back. But I didn't, because just as I turned to leave, I heard it. A voice, low, soft, familiar. Gabe. It came from the hole, from the soil. It wasn't like before. This wasn't some distant echo in the trees. This was inside, close, under my feet. Gabe. It sounded like my brother, like Caleb. But Caleb's been dead for 8 years. I stood frozen, breath caught, heart punching against my ribs. The last time I saw Caleb, he was lying on a hospital gurney after a hunting accident. What was left of his chest was soaked in blood. I still remember the blank look in his eyes, how his hand twitched once, like he was trying to hold on to something that had already let go. I don't know how I made it out of that church. I don't remember walking back to the RV. I only remember the blood on my shoes, thin streaks of it, trailing from the porch to the door, and the symbol carved into the side of my RV, a spiral with 3 lines through the center. The same symbol I'd seen etched into the old gravestone we uncovered. The sun never rose the next day, or maybe it did. But the fog was so thick I couldn't tell. The air was heavier. The trees looked wrong, too close, too still, like they were listening. And all night long, something scratched at the side of the RV, not like an animal, slower, more deliberate, like fingers. I didn't sleep. By the 4th day, Buddy wouldn't eat. He just stared at the corner of the RV, eyes following something I couldn't see. I buried the camera out back. I don't know why. Maybe I thought that if I returned the pictures to the earth, whatever we woke up would go back to sleep. But that's not how these things work. On the 5th day, I woke up to the RV door wide open. Buddy was gone. No paw prints. No sign of struggle. Just gone. The fog never lifted after that. The sky stayed gray. And the church door never closed again. I don't know how long I stayed there. I stopped counting the days. Food ran out. Then water, ... Eventually, I walked down the gravel path through the fog toward where the town should have been. But the town was gone too, just an empty road, a faded sign, and a long, endless stretch of silence. I think I'm still walking,